Hi everyone, and welcome again to my audiovisual channel. Things look a little bit different because I'm doing this episode using Discord instead of the usual Zoom. I changed around the setup and stuff, and I have the camera in a different place, and I have this background here, and yes, the focus of the camera is a little bit different, but you can still, did stuff, look, milkmaid braids with a rope braid and stuff, I did stuff anyway, because it's fun. But anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. This is episode 56 of A Conversation About Art, and I'm going to have this conversation with Joshua Jacobo Art. He is, I think, the owner of New Masters Academy. And, well, that's the conversation that I'm going to have today. If you'd like to support my audiovisual channel, you can do so by liking and leaving a comment on this video, and also sharing it and subscribing to my audiovisual channel. These are all at no additional cost to you and immediate. Very, very helpful. If you would like to help my channel, to support my channel with money, then that is also very welcome. And you can do so by purchasing my drawings directly from my website, which is gabrielahandel.com, just one word. Also, I have a selection of drawings in the Contemporary Figurative Art online gallery. You can also purchase prints of my drawings, and you can also leave me a tip. Purchase prints of my drawings in my imprint gallery, my imprint store, and leave me a tip in coffee or buy me a coffee. All right, so I hope you enjoy this episode, and let me know if you like this setup better than the other setup, or maybe I could do it like this more often. When I start the conversation, I'm going to be looking like this instead of looking at the camera. Like in other occasions, I have the camera like in front of me, and I'm not looking directly at the camera, but it's ish, I'm looking like kind of under the camera, sort of, because that's where I have the laptop. Anyway, but having the view like this reminds me of, like, I don't know, the way that Michaela Peterson and Jordan Peterson have their recordings now, where they have like a view of like in front and like on the side, and that's what they cut into. Anyway, I'm easily amused, and I'm reminded of that. And, well, I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much for your time. Okay, so Joshua Jacobo,
hi.
Thank you very much for being here talking with me today on A Conversation About Art. Please tell, you're episode 56, by the way, and please tell our listeners and viewers who you are and what you do.
I'm an artist, so I work in marble. You're actually seeing in the background, this is my marble carving studio that I run with my wife, Johanna Schweiger, who's a monumental sculptor. We're both out here carving marble in Colorado, southwest Colorado, because our dream was to carve marble. My wife's from Austria, and we need access to the material. That's one of the hard parts. And then we need room to carve. So we are in the process of starting a marble workshop out here in Colorado. In addition to my artwork, I also founded New Masters Academy, which is an online art school. It's an affordable online art school for traditional entertainment, everything in between. And that's remote. So that's based in Southern California. That's where I'm from. So New Masters Academy studios are in Orange County, California. We're now in Colorado. And I actually don't know where you are.
I'm in New York.
Where are we speaking from? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to speak to me.
Yeah, no, thank you for agreeing to talk to me and just to let me ask you stuff about things.
I'm happy.
Okay, so I would like it if you told me more about this whole marble thing. So you're still in the United States, but so you're in a part of the United States where marble exists, or what?
Yeah, so there's only like two marble mines of any notoriety in the United States. One of them is in Delaware, and then the other one is in Colorado. And the Colorado Ewell is what it's called. So the Ewell mines they actually closed down for many years, and then they were reopened again a few decades ago by the Italians who run the Carrara mines. And so the Ewell marble, it's a little bit soft, it's a little bit cooler, but
cooler in
you
color?
Can actually see, this is Carrara back here, by the way, this sculpture that I have in the corner. Then Carrara, yeah. So Carrara is sort of the gold standard for marble. Everything is sort of judged in relation to Carrara. that's how my wife and I studied carving. We studied in Italy. My wife lived in Italy for several years, but we studied it in Italy. We're using sort of the Italian methods because there's not really another tradition to draw upon. The Germans have their own version of it, but really it's the Italian method. And so we trained on Carrara. It's very difficult, very expensive, as you can imagine, to just get marble here. Like the transportation of the material is just enormously expensive. It's huge, it's heavy. And so we tried to make a connection locally in the United States. And so we went to the quarry and we just talked to the quarry master and said we were sculptors and showed him our work. And his name is Stefano at Colorado Marble Quarry. Shout out Stefano. They were so nice. They were like, they not only said that they were going to help us get marble, get situated with marble, but also he's like, you should move to Colorado. You should just move here, and then you can just have the. And it was a little bit of like a thing where it's like, because I get drawn in many directions for, especially being a business owner and having these things. So it's really easy for me to like get distracted. And so I thought that if every morning I wake up and there's mountains and vistas and huge 12,000 pound blocks of marble, that would be a daily reminder to what my priorities are. And it's been working. We're so happy. We have a bunch of like barns and outbuildings. Like this used to be a workshop, I think, for like tractors and like a wood shop. So this is Studio A, and then there's Studio B where Johanna's working, and then we even have a little clay modeling studio. So it's also just the space. If you leave New York or Southern California, it's shocking how much further your money goes in terms of like having room to work. That was an issue with like HOAs. Your neighbors don't like it when you're pounding marble all day.
Of course. What's an HOA?
The homeowners association.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were in San Juan Capistrano, which is like equestrian. It's an equestrian area, but really like it's a bunch of retired people and finance and stuff, and nobody wants any little leaf astray, let alone like two working artists. So it was like we were kind of bumping heads with people there anyway. So we're just like, let's just go for it.
Okay. All right. So how did you start making art? Did you start first drawing and then you tried sculpture and it ended up being your main medium, or how did that go?
I saw the masterpieces of antiquity and Renaissance and Baroque masterpieces at an early age. Well, relatively, I was 14, and when I saw them, particularly the Vatican Museum, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, the Torso Belvedere, Apollo Belvedere, and all of the Bernini's work. And so I saw that at a young age, and I remember thinking like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And as a teenager, obviously, like a lot of teens, I was more interested in, making movies or video games or whatever the relevant entertainment kind of media of our day are. And that was sort of the path I was on. But when I had that experience, and my mother used to take us to museums a lot when we were young, so we'd go to the Huntington, we'd go to the Getty. So I always had this like appreciation for like this seemingly supernatural level of craft and ability and beauty. And I think at like 23, there was a tragedy. I got into it in another podcast, but my a few years prior than that, my parents died in a car accident, and I had to sort of like become a provider in that kind of. It was kind of like a bad few years. And by the time I was 23, I just decided to like change my majors and change my focus. And I gave up on what I was doing at that time.
Which was
I just decided to, which was film. I was going to film school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I decided to just go after that. I want to make Michelangelo's Pietà, something like that, but I want to make it here in my barn. Like that's actually like, I want to make monumental stuff technically at the level of the old masters. If I can do that, I feel like I can then fade away into the sun and melt into a million pieces. But that's all I really want. Not so much to be a famous artist or to be doing a huge commission, which my wife has got that career. She worked on the largest state monument to Mahatma Gandhi in India's history. So she worked on this 40-figure March to the Sea piece. She did two of the figures on that. So she's done like the big monument stuff. And so for me, it's just being able to achieve the actual the technical proficiency. I feel like that's really, really specifically something I want. So when I first started drawing, it was already along those lines. So I started drawing seriously. I mean, I drew as a kid. My mother drew, but I started making little wax models, little bozzetti, which is how Michelangelo and Titian and Leonardo and many of these artists, they worked from these little wax models, like little mannequins, but they would make them. And not only for their 3D work, but their 2D work as well. So I started model making kind of the same year I started studying drawing seriously. And I've been basically doing both of those consistently ever since. So drawing from imagination, designing things, taking them into 3D, drawing from the 3D model. So I'm looking at a work in progress sculpture and I'm drawing it, but I'm making it better. And then using the drawing, kind of going back and forth. So I've been trying sort of to reverse engineer a lot of the traditional practices for my whole career. That's something that I've been really specifically focused on, besides the teaching and education and everything.
Okay, so what role does drawing play in your practice versus what role does sculpture play in your practice? Like, what does drawing feel like for you versus sculpture, and what kind of stuff do you? It's like when you have you have the desire to draw. Why do you have that desire? It's like, how does the desire for drawing differ from the desire to make a sculpture?
Well, I think I'm kind of old-fashioned. I'm pretty in line with like Vasari's. I'm sure you've read Vasari's Lives of the Artists, and the way that they talk about drawing being the mother of all the arts. Like I agree with that. I believe in that. I don't think that you should paint or sculpt or model or animate or do anything until you have like solid drawing skills, because and obviously the word disegno in Italian, in a lot of languages, disegno, there's not necessarily a distinction between drawing and design. So I see drawing as the place where design happens, and the place where the design happens that then it makes its way into the final artwork. So, traditionally that might have been an etching or a painting or a mural or a sculpture or bronze casting or a marble sculpture. But that's the way I look at it. And so for me, my mentor was Glenn Villepeu, who is unbelievable. He's one of the best draftsmen in the world, in my opinion. And Glenn would always say that drawing is thinking, and that you can't really see something until you've drawn it. Like, you might think you know what a horse looks like, for example, but until you've actually drawn it, that's where you really see what your level is, particularly drawing it from imagination. So to me, drawing's always primary. So if I'm drawing, I try to make it, sometimes I'll just draw, just like everybody, I'll draw for fun or I'll sketch. But for me, it's a drawing is more of a process thing. It's how I can come up with the ideas, like a sketch from imagination, work out the proportions and the anatomy, and try to evolve it through iteration, through many levels, to hopefully something complete that's more impressive. And so when you see the sculpture, you're really seeing the drawing, because I've designed it from different angles. And the more angles you have time for, like ideally, like if you look at like, Hellenistic Greek sculptures, they're so perfect from every angle, and that's what's so unbelievable. Like angles that no viewer would ever be able to see, like top down. And I've gone around the world scanning a lot of those things and studying them and recreating some of them and doing studies of them. And so that's one thing that I think is really important with sculpture. So it's always drawing, and what motivates me to draw is the same thing that motivates me to like just create. Like drawing is my default way of thinking, of planning, of getting inspired for a new idea, and also to develop an idea. So it's kind of everything for me, the drawing side of it.
Okay. So then now, about how long have you been doing sculpture?
I've been sculpting, since I think about 15 years, and it's around the same time I started studying drawing. So most of it was additive, so it's modeling, right? So it's actually working in wax, or I'll work in castelline, which is like a half wax, half clay, also modeling clay. And so I've had some really good teachers and inspirations over the years, mentors, people like Ed Fraughton, for example, who's a monument sculptor. So I've most of sculpture happens in the modeling in clay. And then it's like, then you have to prepare it, make a mold or scan it so that the foundry can cast it. Or if you're doing carving, you would then make a plaster, and then you measure off of the plaster into the stone. So you're not, at least the way I'm working more traditionally, you're not going directly into the stone. That's more of a modern thing. That's more like a Henry Moore, or like a discovering what's in the stone, just attacking it. If you were doing something like abstract, like we have an apprentice here on the on the ranch, and his background is in abstract art. So we're doing totally different types of work, but there's a lot of similarity, and so he's able to assist and help us on that as well. But for my process, you need a plaster finished design, a model, a maquette, in order to then transfer it into stone. And so most of the practice that goes into becoming a stone sculptor, in my mind, is actually in modeling. Today, it's a little more specialized. So like in Italy, if you go to Pietrasanta, the people who do the carvings are usually carving for somebody else, and then that person takes the credit usually. So they're carving off of a plaster that they were provided, and they consider themselves artisans, is what they say. So it's not really common that the person who drew it and designed it is also the person that carved it, at least on the representational side. So it's a little bit, it's pretty rare and unusual what we're doing here, because we're trying to go back to that older, the entire inception, the drawing, the modeling, the plastering, and then the carving.
So this method you're talking about in Italy, I think you said that there's a person who specifically carves the thing into the marble. How long? How new or old is that practice? You said it's relatively new.
Well, I mean, Bernini was doing it. So Bernini was starting to offload most of the actual carving to assistants, but Michelangelo, so it is quite old that there's this separation, but really like in the 19th and 18th century in Europe, you had, like in Italy in particular, you had huge marble carving industries. So we've got photos of it. And that's actually in the background here. This is actually an example of 19th century marble carving. This is Eliza. It's a sarcophagus, and so that's about, I don't know, maybe 180 years old. But we have this here as an inspiration because the craftsmanship of that time period, where it was a big industry, is actually pretty high. And it reminds me of like Disney during the golden age of Disney. Like, it was a big production, and so that was like the most recent historical period. And so a lot of the carvers today, that was like their great grandparents or the grandparents of the grandparents of the grandparents. And there's been sort of a steady reduction in ability and quality since then. But that period is sort of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of like the knowledge that you can get. And so the refining of the measuring process, so being able to take accurate measurements from during Alberti's times, it was kind of complicated. You had like a disc over the sculpture and over the model, and then there would be like a plumb line that would hang off, and then you'd have to take measurements off of that plumb in towards the sculpture. And so and then in ancient times they had 3 compass methods, but the measuring was always the really difficult part for, if it's not you that designed it, right? Because you don't know where the design lines are, you're just copying it. And so the pointing machine, supposedly, according to the Italians, it was Canova that refined the pointing machine, the macchinetta a punta. And that is basically, it's just got 3 points, like a tripod, and you put it, and then it's got a little adjustable needle where you can take 3-dimensional measurements. You don't have to like go off of a plumb line or use squares for that side of it. And so I think also when the measuring technology got to a certain point, the industry could really take off, because now they could outsource a lot of, not outsource, but they could delegate a lot of tasks to different people, because as long as they had a good practice for representing the measurements for that studio, the client's probably going to be happy. And so it's the great grandparents of those craftspeople who are the only teachers on hand, and so those are the people we learned from. And so that's a period that we were specifically interested in. But the only difference here, and some people do this, but the only difference here is we're designing the monument-sized sculptures, and that's the goal. We've been doing that. We've been here for 3 years. So we've made several sculptures, and we're going bigger and bigger, but I've already got a design for a 9-foot sculpture I want to make, and I've already got the block. So it's a 12,000 pound block. Just moving it, we had to get a forklift, obviously. You need cranes, and you need ways to move the material. You don't want to like smash your feet or smash your hands or die.
You'll do more than smash your feet and hands if that thing falls on you.
Oh yeah. So it's also, I don't have that background too. So I don't have like it was like, the first time I ordered a big truck like this, the first time I talked to the guy with the crane, and I'm like, wow, how does this work? And he's like, it comes down and picks, and then he's like, okay, you got to strap it up. So it's like, we're figuring all of this out at this level, like as we go. So it's a little bit nerve wracking, but the goal is we make original artwork, small, obviously, traditionally. Then we blow it up. I've got a big pantograph here. It's like a big arm that I had this Italian craftsperson make. It was the last one he ever made, actually. And that allows us to measure off a small model to make a bigger model. So we go from the clay, then we go to a plaster, and then we use that pantograph to make the plaster monument size, or whatever the full size is, in clay. And then you got to make a bunch of molds. Then that gets into plaster, because the clay's too soft. It'll get damaged during the carving process. Is really rough. And so then you have your big plaster. That is then what gets brought into the stone. And you're also making, mistakes happen. It's natural stone. There could be chert or just like a flaw somewhere, and you have to redesign it. You see Michelangelo doing that, for example. Like there's a problem, and so you got to be smart about how you go into the stone, because let's say I'm carving here and I'm coming in, and then there's like a big flaw across the nose. Well, I might have to push the head back. So I need to, that's the kind of complexity you get into with carving, because then you have to redesign this. Well, I'm not going to redesign it in the model, so I have to like, so there's also a lot of, there's a lot that changes throughout the modeling process, especially if the stone's so expensive and you invested so much time into it, you run into a problem. You have to be able to like redesign it. And so, sorry, I don't want to keep, I tend to just get going.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
it's good. Keep going.
Yeah, so that's the process. So right now I've been, and I've also I want to record the process of marble carving, because it's kind of inaccessible. It takes so long. People don't really understand it. I found, like, people know what drawing looks like more or less, but when it comes to marble, it's like a big mystery. And so I'm trying to find ways to shoot it in a way that will get attention and promote our work, but also like show people the enormous amount of effort and craft that goes into it. So I'm doing like long time lapses shot on with high-res camera, so I can punch in like 800%, so I can do camera moves. I'm trying to like also document and share the process, because I want to inspire other people to do marble carving, because the community is tiny, and if more people were doing it, I think it'd be more exciting, it'd be more fun, more people to collaborate with, for example.
There'd probably be a lot more problem deduction, because you have more heads that are working together. So like then there's more people that are dealing with the same issues, and so then there would be more people to think about how to solve and streamline and polish the issues. So like I think that would be actually the benefit of having more people involved more than anything else.
The craft will improve, and so when you have, for thousands of years, the ancient Greeks, they're all just craft people after craft people, handing it down, improving, making small additions. You see these periods, especially like in antiquity or ancient Egypt, you see when it slows down. Buddhist art too, after Gandhara and Buddhist influence from Hellenistic work, the way the early Buddhists work. But I like the traditions that are slower moving, because more minds, like you say, are attacking this problem. And then I think the actual results become bigger than anybody. Like I think as contemporary artists, everyone needs to have their own style, they think. And so they're sort of reinventing the wheel and trying to be different instead of drawing upon that tradition, which is really available for everybody, I think.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Jacobo, what is art in your opinion?
This is actually important more than ever, maybe because of the AI conversation that I keep getting drawn into the AI conversation, because a lot of the kids a lot of the students, I call them kids, sorry, that's condescending.
Yeah, I do that too.
A lot of the students are, they're worried that there's not going to be a future for art
That's
careers.
That's obviously not true.
Yeah. I think it's a cultural artifact of humans. Big part of the point is that it's something that humans do. It's something that humans create. But what I like about art is that this applies to abstract and representational art both, I think. But what I like about art is that, like, for example, a photograph just records, the flux for each part of the sensor of how many photons hit and the wavelengths, and reconstructs it as color. I think that's very different than an artist. An artist, you're using your own human brain to create visual experiences for consumption by other human brains. And because these techniques work on your brain, like, for example, we can see a simple line drawing. Like, why is it that when we look at a simple line drawing, linear drawing, with no value, why can we see it? How can we see that this is a, like a dog, for example? And part of that is, like, I think, because I've studied a vision science, and part of that is like the edge detection part of vision science, where our brain is creating a 3D model, not an image, but our brain creates a 3D model and is constantly updating that model. And so there are some ways that artists and visual artists have found to tap into that just through trial and error, I'm assuming, just because it looks good to them, other people respond to it. But through trial and error, I think art is very sophisticated. It's tapping into our visual system, and most of what our brains are doing are related to our visual processes. It taps in, and then it creates an experience in the mind of the viewer. And then if that experience is just making that connection at all is powerful, but also if then once the connection is made, then there's some meaning, some intent, some substance, some narrative, whatever it is that the artist is also trying to communicate. So I think it's a really divine method of communication between human minds. And it's also I like that it's sort of an unsolvable problem. I like complicated problems. And I like that no matter how good it is, it can always be better, or it can always be maybe another option creatively could create a more powerful effect. At least that's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but okay. Okay, but so all right. So the reason for which I started the podcast is because I like to think that what I do when I'm drawing is art, except that I don't know what it is. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons for which I started the podcast. The real and probably the biggest reason is because I want to sell my work. And so, like,
That's interesting. It makes sense. You need to understand what it is you're doing, right?
Yeah. And so, like, I also want to cleanse my palate of all of the irony and sarcasm of postmodernism that accepts banana duct tape as art as well. And I don't want to have to deal with the resentment of that when I am making my own work, because then that's going to contaminate my attitude when I try to sell the work. And so, like, I want to have like a nice positive attitude. And know what it is that I'm talking about. Like know your product, believe in your product, like this stuff. Okay, sense. but so like when I'm making a drawing, it feels important, and it feels like I'm over, like like I am doing something, but I don't know exactly what it is, because it's like it's not the same as, because when you write by hand, you're also drawing. That's a line drawing, basically. But it's not the same as when I'm trying to draw the figure, and when I'm trying to like develop the surface of the skin, for example, like this stuff. So like,
I personally think calligraphy is very connected to drawing, and like I've been working on a new course that we've been rolling out called Drawing One. That's actually free on our Discord while it's in beta, and that's kind of one of the premises, which is that, like, the early drawing manuals, and I collect these, and I own the first drawing book in history by Odoardo Fialetti. The first how to draw books ever made, this is before the first art school, they were in the exact tradition of the calligraphy manuals. So there were calligraphy manuals, and it was the same format that they used for the first drawing manuals. And also, there was a big emphasis on line work, too. So I think that the calligraphy side of it, I think drawing is a lot like calligraphy, because calligraphy is an appealing, beautiful pattern, and so is a drawing. And it has to be studied and learned and rehearsed, like the different strokes. Can you make a straight line? Can you make a regular curve, an irregular curve? Can you make it flow together nicely? I think in a lot of ways, drawing is, it's an art of pattern. And so that pattern can be just a configuration of lines, like the eye study that all throughout, all the way to the Bargue plates and the Julian plates. But going back to Fialetti, Michelangelo would use this to teach his pupils. They would learn these patterns, like the eye from the front, the eye from the side. These were ways of communicating that language of drawing. And so I think at least right now, because I'm always researching this and my opinions change, but right now a big part of it is that pattern. It's creating a beautiful pattern. If you're working with line, then it is like calligraphy. You're creating beautiful lines. Like, for example, like an S in calligraphy is not done as one swoop. It's done as like one C curve and then another C curve. And then those curves have to like link up so that it creates this illusion of a continuous line. That's exactly how the old drawing manuals taught it as well. So I think that once you get into like perspective and 3 dimensions and more of going for like a total tonal illusion, that pattern is activated on a different level. Like, for example, like people doing side-size academic stuff, like the kind of thing that you would see at like a Florence Academy of Art. I don't think that they're using line in that decorative way. So I don't think that's where the pattern comes in. I think for them, it's more like the overall staging, right, of the model in the scene. That's part of the composition. But a lot of it is literally in how the values are organized and how those groups of values, those masses, to put it like Harold Speed, how those fit together. So same thing with like impressionist painters that paint outdoors. They're not designing beautiful lines, and they're not connecting them, and they're not doing that, but they are dealing with composition, and they are using expressive brush strokes to represent, the optical appearance and the optical sensations. And I think that's where the pattern comes in. Mm-hmm. So for me, looking at different like art forms and art styles, the way I've been sort of understanding it and teaching it has to do with like, at what level is the design happening? And so if you go to like a Fioletti or a Carracci, Annibale Carracci or Michelangelo, often that design is operating on the line by line basis. But then there's also that sculptural reality, right? It's like the information that the calligraphy like encodes in a way. It's like, what is this 3D space? Like Alberti says, like a window into the world. And so there's so many different ways to like design that I think the different styles are more about where that design is happening and what are you taking for granted, like from a reference or from life, and what are you building, basically. What are you inventing and what are you taking? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense. That's sort of the way I've been on lately for that.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you mean by? I mean, why did you use the word divine earlier when I asked you what is art?
It's not. Yeah. For me, like my first experience of seeing the Sistine Chapel ceiling when I was 14, that experience was like it was a transcendental experience for me. Mm-hmm. It was not just me looking at something and seeing that it was well done. I had an emotional like response. I had like an experience, and that kind of experience. And I have had with like Fantasia when I was a kid. Like I've had that kind of experience, but there's something about like when the craft and the beauty gets to like a certain level of mastery that's only been attained, I think, only a few times throughout history, or at least that we can access. But when it gets to that level, it becomes like a transformative experience for the viewer. And I don't think it's just me. I looked around the room, I've seen the Sistine Chapel many times since, but I look around the room, there's always people crying, and it could be that they're crying because
is that what you mean? Like you cried?
I don't know if I cried or not, honestly. I may have. I was I was transported. Like I actually felt like, it's a little bit like this is going to like Gombrich and like the illusionary drawing idea, but it's a little bit like when the craft is so well refined, the illusion can just be magic. Like as far as my brain was concerned, I was literally looking at heaven and earth and hell in the Last Judgment. I was literally seeing these things, even though I know it was people with, hair brushes on sticks painting with pigment. Like I know that's the reality, but the experience is magical, and something about that combination reaches across. I mean, like I went to I don't know, you probably saw Michelangelo's exhibit at the Met a few years ago, mm-hmm. The Divine Draftsman. That was like the biggest exhibition they had ever had in their history. Like they made millions of people came to see that exhibition, and this artist has been dead for 400 or 500 years, and it still has that impact on people. I don't think you're going to get that kind of excitement about anything at that level, because some of these artists like Raphael and Michelangelo, they reached a level where the Divine Draftsman was the name of the exhibition. It really seems like something magic, something spiritual, something more powerful, even though I know it's a craft. So as a teacher, I always talk about it as a craft. I say it's not about talent, it's about skill. Anybody can learn how to draw. I want to empower people to basically become the best versions of artists of themselves. But at the same time, there's levels to the game. And at the highest levels in history, if you really experience those works face to face, it's just something else. It's another kind of experience. And I'm not a spiritual person, but at the same time, like I don't have the language to explain that. It's not the language I've ever felt with a video game or a VR experience or a movie or a comic. Nothing has ever touched me on that level, and it's really the only work at that level. And also, it's like the ambition of it. So maybe some of that has to do with the artists themselves. If they're doing it for a spiritual reason, like Michelangelo's doing it for the Pope, it's for the Catholic Church. He's a devout Christian. He really feels like, Michelangelo, his name, his branding, his marketing was very much about this divinity. But if he really thought he was tapping into another universe, or he thought that God wanted him to do this, whatever he was thinking, I think that has an effect on the final output. And so I think the intention that goes into the art, I think because if you know that you're working in a studio and you need to animate these sequences and they need to look a certain way so the studio execs are happy so they can sell toys and merchandise and stuff, and it's very much like a job, and you're trying to do the best job you can within those confines. But I think that with something like Michelangelo or the ancient Egyptians, or votive statues of antiquity, where it's like, no, these statues are sacred, they are magic, they are imbued with magic. And it's hard not to imagine that the cave paintings, 45,000-year-old Indonesian cave paintings, hard not to imagine that the illusion of drawing was also connected with the illusion of the deeper hidden world, something like that. And even though I'm not a spiritual person, I see it and I pick up on it and I can feel it. And so I want to tap into it from a craft perspective in my own work. And I want to try to like draw people's attention that no, there's another level of beauty, and there's another level of excellence. And it's, no one today can get close to it.
Do you think that, you know, if you were to compare the work produced in, you know, the world of the past or whatever, because I mean, there's obviously like a schism somewhere where art, besides the obvious postmodernism or whatever, like you know, Dadaism and the ready-mades and this type of stuff. Do you think, because you use the word divine, I guess, do you think that the, you know, like the view that we have had of, or like the way that humanity's relationship with religion has changed? Do you think that this might have something to do with also the way that art has changed? Because I feel like something of the sort has been commented. Because it's, I mean, I agree with you in terms of like the amount of dedication and determination to make something really ambitious. And it's like the cause is like this greater cause that crosses, that it's like way beyond, it's like beyond relationships, beyond country, beyond tribes, whatever it is. It's like beyond everyone, and it includes everyone also, because it's kind of for everyone in a way, but it's like for this bigger cause that then benefits everyone, or some with the beauty of the image that you made. So do you think this change in the relationship that we have with religion now also changes? It's like, do you think, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, one of my mentors, Steve Houston, we would talk about this a lot, and he would always make the case that, and I don't even know if this is like his theory or if this is something that other people talk about, I don't know, but he was talking about how the comic book heroes have sort of taken the place of like the Greek gods and the gods of the past, even in terms of like their role in society. And so I'm not an expert. My mother was a teacher. She taught literature, and she was really into myth. I'm not an expert on myth, but it does seem to me that in the absence of a lot of the cultural stories in the religious tradition, in the absence of having those stories, I think that something like Harry Potter or something like Spider-Man has a bigger appeal, because even though we know that there's no such thing as Harry Potter and there's no such thing as Spider-Man, at the same time, like many artists are depicting Spider-Man, whether it's Todd McFarlane or Ryan Benjamin or whoever, or George Pratt or whoever gets a chance to do it. So many artists are depicting this hero. The hero's details change, you know, like it was, I don't know, maybe back in the 80s it was one thing, and then now he's carrying a phone. So the time period, but it's still a myth, and in some ways. And even though we know it's entertainment, so I think in some ways entertainment maybe has stepped up to fill in the gap of myth, that maybe if maybe there is a gap of myth, maybe people feel that, maybe they want these stories to help them socialize, I guess, but to shape their lives based on these stories of these greater things than us. So I think that entertainment and fantasy and things like that have taken the place. I don't think that Lord of the Rings or whatever, I don't think these would have been as popular in a more devout society, because I think that there is something about, we want a story, something that happened thousands of years ago, back when the world was different. I think there's there's probably some kind of human yearning for that art probably, it does. The Catholic, we've done work for the Catholic Church. Johanna has done a lot of work for the Catholic Church. So, in terms of like, there is still sacred art. There's still, in lots of places in the world, there's still sacred art still gets made, but it's clear that they're not the big, you know what I mean? They're not the big provider of jobs that they were in the past. And so really it's like entertainment is really where the money is now, unless you're one of these very, very few people who know how to work the system and get the board of a company that you're on to purchase your work to inflate your prices so that you can, you know what I mean? Like there's this game that it's not really accessible to other people, because it's a game that's played by people with a different level of capital at their disposal. And so I think if artists look at, oh, this thing sold for $50 million, yeah, but like, that's not you though. Like this is, you know, I don't want to use too strong of language, but it's a manipulation of the market, and it's detached from the reality of the craft of making art. I think I'm talking about like the high-end gallery and that kind of market. But there's also a market for old masterworks, and I think that that's relevant. Like we can't ignore that. Like one of the most expensive stuff you can buy is a masterpiece by the old masters. And I think that says something, not just about history. I think that says something about that craft, that quality. Like I can't give you a drawing that looks as good as Albrecht Dürer. So if you want to buy a drawing that good, you must be willing to pay that $20 million.
I mean, I think that actually also says something good about, because it's like, it's really easy to shit on the art world and just shit on people who want to make money and people who want to cheat to make money. But it's like, at the same time, it's like, all right, so they were able to game the system, but then the old masters, it's like, obviously they're still better in terms of it. It's like, regardless of what game is being played, because like as a whole population, it's obvious that we still, for whatever reason, still appreciate that more. So like, I think that's a positive thing. It's like, it's still.
I mean, I think the NFT crash is also evidence of that. It's like, you can play a little financial game and you can attach art objects to that game, but that doesn't say anything about the tradition of art. And so I think very much about the tradition of art. Like, what am I doing and what does that have in common with past artists that came before me? And what responsibilities do I have to have an apprentice or pass on knowledge? And what responsibilities do I have to create opportunities? So, I mean, the guilds are gone, the old art guilds, but I think we can probably rebuild a lot of that community. And we need to be able to say what we think good art is and not let the studio executives say it and not let the art market say it. I think we need to, I think the institutions have sort of crumbled, a lot of them, and we're sort of figuring out, we're kind of on our own, and we have the internet, but we also, like, who are the leaders? Where should we be coming together? I think that if new art institutions could be created, and this is what we're trying to do, but if new art institutions could be created, you're going to have more power, just like a labor union has power with a company. An art guild has power, and so we should be the one defining what makes good craft and not just letting the client define that, the people who are paying. And I think that's part of the problem, is we don't have strong institutions anymore.
I mean, I kind of think of it more as like collaboration almost, and because it's still like an economic market. It's like a free market, and it's like in a free market, it's the relationship between supply and demand that determines what becomes more popular and that also polishes the products into becoming better because of the competition. So I think
that's definitely happening in entertainment, because most young students that I come into contact with, they love comics and they love manga and they love these things, and so they don't really care artistically what this falls under. They'll just do fan art of their favorite character, and then they'll draw it one way, but then they'll use like impressionistic digital brushstrokes for it. So I think that's already happening. It's pretty clear that the most popular art forms are not the banana on the wall. Today it's probably like comics art, and it's mostly enthusiasm amongst the younger people who want to get into that. And so
like gaming
whatever
stuff.
you want to, what was that?
Like gaming stuff?
Yeah, I think that's where most of the energy is, and that's already a big rebuke of the art world, because it's like, well, I don't care if this is high art. And all that, I mean, a lot of that high art stuff that comes from the Bauhaus. That's where they said like, oh, decoration's way down here, and then conceptual. Like, I think that's getting rejected. I think that whole era is coming to an end. Maybe not financially, because there's still so much investment in it, but in terms of like you, if I meet somebody on the street and they say, oh, I'm an artist too, and they're a young person, I know they're not talking about that. It's always that they like their favorite, which is, I think it's natural. When you're a kid, the art you're exposed to is, picture books for kids and entertainment and stuff. It's natural that that's sort of like what you learn as is art, and then you transition into that because you want to make the things you love, and then you find that, okay, what's the serious art path? And you look into that and you're like, I don't want to do this. This is garbage. Like, they're not teaching me how to draw in these universities. Why would I do that? I'm just going to keep making the art I like and put it on Twitter and sell my posters or this and that. So I think that's already happening, where you have this independent, boom of people who are just finding their own market, building their own communities, which I really think is exciting. I just wish that I wish they also had gone to museums. Like, I also want them to look at the better craft. If they also saw the Michelangelos and could integrate that would upgrade everything they want to do.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
if you're
sure.
drawing a manga comic and you studied Michelangelo, your work is going to be better. And so I like the independence of it. I just want to I want to upgrade the level of the ability.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Jacobo, what is beauty in your opinion?
I think beauty is something that happens in the human brain in reaction to to some kind of stimulus. And so earlier when I was talking about how the artist is not like a camera, the artist can make you see movement when the image is still, for example, with gesture. It can make you feel like this thing is alive when you know it's dead. You're looking at a sculpture, it's just a rock that I hit with a chisel and a hammer, but yet people will say, she looks beautiful, he looks beautiful, this kind of thing. And so I think that beauty is, but it's obviously there's beauty of there's many forms of beauty, like you appreciate it. I think it's an extension of our natural humanity that we're exploiting with this game called art. That's what I think. And so some of it's evolutionary biology, sexual things like symmetry. We like symmetry because there's a connection between symmetry and fitness affects survival. And so a more symmetrical face is going to be more attractive to people. They've done these kinds of studies that an asymmetrical face, not that you can't find that an asymmetrical face beauty in different ways. So I think it's operating on multiple levels in a really complex way. But I think there are some things like I think beautiful curves. I think there's something to that. So lines that are curved and long and flowing and continuous, I think there's something appealing about that. Symmetry, I think well-proportioned objects are important. Like you're looking for a stick, you're on a walk, and you want to find a stick for walking. You're looking for a stick that's not going to hurt your hand. It's not all gnarled. It's not too asymmetrical. So you're trying to find like the right stick. Like Albrecht Dürer talks about artists being like a honeybee that selects from many flowers to make the most beautiful honey. In a way, we're always doing that. Like when even like our dogs do this. So they're picking up little bones and they want the good bone and they want to put it in the special spot. Well, where's the special spot? Well, it's over by this tree on this hill. And so it's just interesting because I think there's like a natural selection that's happening where we're selecting things as tools. We're selecting good spots to walk. Should I go down here? Should I go over here? Where's a good place for shelter? I think we're constantly like selecting. There's this constant discrimination and discernment that's going on in our minds. And I think some of those things that we like can be like directly stimulated by the artist. They can intentionally, well, I know you're going to like this curve. So I'm going to put this curve here. And I know you like when, I know I'm the artist talking to the viewer. I know that you like when you can understand the scene. Ambiguity makes you work harder, makes your brain work harder to understand what's going on. It's unpleasant, it's work. So when I make a rib cage, I want it to feel very round so that you see it kind of like an egg, because an egg is simple to understand. So just by making it clear and digestible, it's almost like cooking a meal. We can prepare it in such a way that their brain will receive it. And I think a lot of it is just the tradition. We're told it's better if the figures feel alive than feel stiff. It's a tradition we learned. We're told that you want to separate the light and the shadow family if you're using tone. So a lot of the stuff that comes from the tradition of art, I think it is tapped into this this appeal that happens in the mind of the viewer. But there's so much to it, obviously, and so much that we don't understand, I think, as well to this day.
The way that you described it reminded me a little bit of the way that, like, I don't know, cynical people, I guess, sometimes talk about love. They're like, yeah, it's just a chemical reaction in your brain and that's it. I mean, that's like the impression that I got is, I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, it just, do I have the wrong impression there or what?
Well, I think, no, I'm. It's funny that you say this because I assume people think this and don't say it. I think that there's just different types of people. Some people make sense of things. Like there's almost like an over-reliance on articles they read on science, even though they're not a scientist and they can't do the equations. They're always like, oh, that this one neurobiologist says that if you do this, and I know that's kind of like a thing now where a lot of people they have too much shallow knowledge maybe for their own good, and they're always trying to make sense of it. But in the case of art, well, my personality does lean that way. Like I'm very analytical. But I think in the case of art, like when you look at the example of like the Renaissance person, I mean, at the time is the Renaissance man, right? This idea of the polymath where like Leonardo is inventing anatomy as we know it, and he's also helping to invent perspective or discover it, depending on how you think of it. And so like the old masters, the people that are my favorite artists that I aspire to, they were engineers in times of war. They were designers. They were diplomats. They were poets. They were architects. They were sculptors. They were draftspeople. And so I've always to me, the model, like my romantic hero of an artist is not somebody who does something that they don't know how it works or why they work because they just feel it. It's somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. And mastery is about control. So it's about, I want to control. The drawing's not going to come out good or come out bad depending on my mood. I'm going to make sure it comes out good because I'm from their perspective now, because I'm a master of the craft. And so I think that is required to reach those higher levels. I don't think that a more, I don't know, I don't think a looser attitude towards it or a more mysterious reverence, which is necessarily is going to allow you to reach some of those higher levels, because there's a lot of just like practical, like understanding stuff, like understanding the mechanic, like for example, anatomy. If you want to make your figures have more anatomy, more naturalistic anatomy, the only way to do it is to learn it. Mm-hmm. Like there's no way to just feel your way through the anatomy. You know what I mean? So it depends on like what you're trying to do and what art is for you. Because a lot of people, art is therapeutic. Art is a way to do something that's nonverbal, right? They can just get into this flow state, if that's even a real thing, to get into this flow state and just lose time. And that's very pleasurable. And so I think different people get different things out of art. I just have this like this tunnel vision towards mastery, and in particular, like this certain artists and certain movements. And I think because all the evidence in studying art history over all these years shows me how analytical they were. Like Leonardo is one of my heroes. There's no doubt about it. He's analytical. I mean, you can just sit there and read hundreds of pages and diagrams. Like he was trying to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And whether or not he could figure it out mechanically, let's say, like he had this unfinished idea of moto, like he had this unfinished theory that we can look at through the Codex Huijins of like joint movements and circles and how those connect. I don't think that would have worked, because the joint movements, we know the range of motion of those joints now. I've studied those, like that's part of science now, and that wouldn't have worked. But just this idea of like trying to impose order on chaos, trying to impose a circle or a box or some kind of order. I think that idea of ordering is a big part of what artists do. And even if the theory's bad, even if the theory's wrong, even if you're not really understanding the mechanics of it, but you are creating an experience, I think that is very much like what I see when I look at masterful art. Sometimes they got the pelvis wrong. Sometimes they mess things up. They from a lack of understanding or maybe like a poor understanding. But at the same time, that it's almost like the level of intention is kind of what matters more. Like how much do you care about the thing that you're doing? Or is it just, are you just drawing for a paycheck? Mm-hmm. Like maybe you're doing the same illustration again and again many times. Mm-hmm. So I do think the nature of mastery is something that is felt. Like we talked about the divine, we talked about the spiritual side. I think you have to feel it strongly to spend so many years sacrificing for art. Like you have to have some kind of like personal emotional driver, otherwise you probably wouldn't be doing this at all. Like that's what motivates you, or maybe that's what your message or your intent is. Maybe it's to glorify God, maybe it's to do this or that. But in terms of the mechanics of it, it's both. Like it's like the Dionysian Apollonian horses, and you're trying to control all those horses at once. There's chaos and order. I feel like that's what it takes to be great at art. It takes both. So you got to be able to feel it and be able to subjectively react to it. Like people say, well, this portrait, what does it need? Like what does the painting seem to need? You know what I mean? And sometimes that's intuitive, right? And you can't necessarily make the argument, or you can't necessarily teach it. But at the same time, there's also like a craft, and craft is always about order. There's no craft. There's no violin maker that says, oh, I just feel it. Mm-hmm. There's no concert pianist who is selling out a concert hall that's like, I don't know, I just feel it. No, they studied it. They studied it, and they studied it as a craft. And so they're thinking of the mechanics, and they're thinking about their finger length, and they're thinking about the position, and they're thinking about all of that stuff. The more competitive the art, or the bigger the rewards are for mastery, the higher that level is. And so I don't see any difference between that and drawing, except for when you draw, you're the composer and the violinist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we've reached the 50-minute mark there, Mr.
Cool.
Jacobo. So I think I'm going to start closing it out. I like this last muse here,
Sure.
But is there anything else that you want to add? Anything, any project you have coming up? Anything you're excited about? Where can people find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on. I'm on YouTube now. I started doing videos for the marble workshop, so you can find me at my name on YouTube, or you can find me on Instagram for my artwork. I'm also on the New Masters Academy Discord, which is free for everybody. So That's my online school that I founded. We have a Discord community where I think it's like at 14,000 people right now. And we all just support each other and give each other ideas. And if you have a question about anything, like especially pens, if you have any questions about pens, we got people for you. But it's a really supportive, encouraging community. And I encourage you, if you're watching this podcast and you feel that you don't have a community, maybe it's where you live, maybe it's other circumstances, but if you don't feel like you have an art family, you're more than welcome to come to the New Masters Academy Discord community. There's no upsell, there's no price. It's just a really supportive place, and it's great to do drawings and do paintings with the support of a community because somebody can help you. You know, we don't get very far on our own in art, unfortunately, I don't think. So I would definitely check that out. Also, go to museums. So if you're watching this and you're somebody who loves art and maybe you love all kinds of different things, you need to actually go to the museums because your Instagram feed and your Twitter feed, they're never going to show you the best art. That's just not how they work. There's no part of the algorithm that looks at the quality. So you could have somebody that has 10 million followers and they can't hold a candle to somebody that was well, maybe dead for 130 years. The only way that you can experience that is to go to your local museums or make a trip. You know, I think that's the most life-changing thing as an artist you can do that I notice a lot of young artists are not doing, which is actually see the masterpieces. Until you see that, you can't really join the conversation because you don't really know what. It's like you're showing up at the party late. So I recommend that as well.
Okay, yeah, that's especially the one about going to museums. That's a really, really, really good recommendation for all. In my opinion, you know, I agree with you of all levels of artists. Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So then I'm gonna start closing it out. Thank you, Joshua, very much for your time, and thank you for talking to me today and for your time.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me, and thank you everyone who will watch and listen. And well, if you would like to support Joshua, me, or the podcast, or all three, all the pertinent links are going to be in the video description. And I invite everyone to like and share this video and subscribe to my audiovisual channel. And well, thank you very much. And see you everyone next time. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.